The watcher in the walls. The snowstorm was sudden and unrelenting. Blake had taken a detour through the mountains on his way to his family's cabin, seeking a shortcut. Now he was stranded in his car, engine dead, phone out of range. He spotted the flicker of lights through the trees, a house, half buried in snow, smoke curling from the chimney. Salvation. The door creaked open before he could knock. An old woman peered out. Her skin was as pale as the snow, eyes cloudy but sharp. "You'll freeze to death out there," she rasped. "Come in." The warmth hit him instantly. Inside was cluttered but cozy, with mismatched furniture and dozens of clocks on the walls, none of them ticking. "You live alone?" Blake asked, watching her prepare a pot of tea with trembling hands. "I did," she said, "until he came back." Blake blinked. "Who?" "The Watcher. He moves through the walls. Scrapes and whispers. Leaves things in different places. Sometimes, he watches you sleep." Blake gave a nervous laugh, assuming she was senile. But that night, lying on the lumpy couch, he heard it, scratching in the walls. He sat up, heart pounding. A low whisper slithered through the dark. "You're not supposed to be here." He froze. The next morning, the woman was gone. In her place was a note, written in shaky hand. "He doesn't like strangers. Leave while you still can." Blake tried the door. It wouldn't open. Neither would the windows. He searched the house for a phone, a tool, anything. In the attic, he found a wall smeared with strange symbols, and photographs. Dozens of them. All of the strangers sleeping. All taken from above their beds. One of them was him, curled on the couch downstairs. The photo hadn't been there yesterday. He stumbled back, heart hammering. Scratching. Behind him. A voice, right behind his ear. "Now you're part of the collection." He turned and saw nothing, but the camera clicked on its own, a red flash in the darkness. A month later. Blake's sister arrived at the mountain cabin, expecting him for the holidays. He never showed. Worried, she called the police. They found his car abandoned, and a trail of footprints leading to a house deep in the woods. But there was no house. Just snow. No sign anyone had lived there for years. Just a decaying foundation, and in the rubble, a single photograph nailed to a tree. Blake, asleep. And behind him, in the wall, a face watching. 2 weeks later, the photograph was removed from evidence. No explanation. No record of who took it. But in a new home across the country, a young couple hangs an old mirror they found at a thrift store. That night, while brushing her hair, the woman sees a flash of movement in the reflection. She turns, nothing. But behind the glass, if you look closely, Blake's face is still watching. And he's smiling. Blake hadn't seen another car in hours. The winding mountain roads had grown treacherous, and the snow was falling thick and fast, swallowing the world in white. What was supposed to be a shortcut to his family's cabin had turned into a frozen maze. His phone had no service, his GPS had long since given up, and now, his engine had sputtered out. He cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the wheel. The heater wheezed once, then went cold. That's when he saw the light. A flicker, barely visible through the wall of trees ahead. A house. Or a cabin, maybe. Smoke drifted from its chimney, impossibly inviting against the storm's howling wrath. He didn't hesitate. The house was old. Weather-beaten wood and slanted beams, windows fogged from within. Blake raised his fist to knock, but before he could, the door creaked open. An old woman stood in the doorway, wrapped in a faded shawl, her skin pale and thin as paper. Her eyes were cloudy, milky with cataracts, but they seemed to see him clearly. "You'll freeze out there," she said. "Come in." Blake hesitated. Then nodded, grateful. The interior was warmer than he expected, and cluttered. Old books stacked in uneven towers. Porcelain dolls with blank stares lined the shelves. But what stood out most were the clocks. Dozens of them. All kinds, cuckoo clocks, grandfather clocks, pocket watches. All stopped. All silent. Strange collection, Blake murmured. They used to tick, the woman said. Before he came back. He looked at her. Who? She stirred a pot of tea, her hands trembling. The watcher. He lives in the walls now. Scrapes around. Whispers. Leaves little signs. Blake chuckled uneasily. Like a ghost? The woman didn't laugh. He watches you sleep. That night, Blake lay on the dusty couch in the parlor. The old woman had disappeared into a back room and hadn't returned. The wind screamed outside. The fire had burned low. And then, the scratching began. It was faint, but unmistakable. A soft, erratic scraping behind the walls. Then, whispers. Not words, but breathy murmurs, like something trying to remember how to speak. He sat up, heart racing. Then a voice, cold and close, breathed directly into his ear. You're not supposed to be here. Blake spun around. Nothing. Just shadows. He didn't sleep. The next morning, the old woman was gone. In her place was a single note, scrawled in shaking handwriting. He doesn't like strangers. Leave while you still can. The door wouldn't open. Nor the windows. Panic rising, Blake searched the house. In the attic, he found a wall covered in strange symbols, runes or wards, he couldn't tell. And photographs. Dozens of them. Each photo showed someone asleep. Different people, different eras, judging by their clothes. Each photo was taken from above, as though someone had stood on the ceiling, watching. In the center of the wall was a new photograph. Blake. Curled on the couch. His blood ran cold. That photo wasn't there yesterday. The whispering grew louder. The walls pulsed with movement, like something was crawling behind the plaster, pacing. He tried to scream, but his voice stuck in his throat. In a mirror, he saw it, a face behind him, not quite human. White skin stretched too tight. Black eyes, bottomless. Watching. Always watching. He turned, nothing. Then the lights went out. In the dark, he heard the camera shutter click. Weeks passed. When Blake failed to show up at the family cabin, his sister, Amanda, drove the mountain roads in search of him. She found his car buried in snow, abandoned. Local police followed tracks through the woods to where he'd supposedly gone. But there was no house. No chimney. No foundation. Just untouched snow. Only one thing was left behind, a single photograph nailed to a tree. Blake, asleep. And in the wall behind him, the blurry outline of a face watching from a crack. Months passed. The case went cold. Across the country, in a small town in Oregon, a young couple moved into a fixer-upper. They scoured local thrift shops for decor and found an ornate, antique mirror in a store that had no name. It gives me the creeps, the woman, Jess, said with a laugh. Feels like it's watching me. They hung it in the hallway. That night, while brushing her teeth, Jess noticed something. A flash of movement in the reflection. She turned. Nothing. But in the mirror, if she stood just right, she could see another room. One that wasn't part of their house. An old parlor. A fireplace. Clocks lining the walls. All stopped. And in the mirror's depth, someone watching. It was Blake. Pale. Expressionless. Eyes like dark glass. As she stared in frozen horror, he smiled. The next day, Jess tried to show her boyfriend. But the mirror only showed their hallway. Nothing more. That night, she woke to scratching behind the walls. And a voice that whispered, "Now you're part of the collection." The engine hummed low as Blake turned off the main highway and onto an icy, winding mountain road that didn't appear on his GPS. According to the old paper map he'd dug out of the glove box, it would cut nearly an hour off the trip to his family's cabin near Oak Hollow Lake. The thought of getting there before dark had been tempting enough to try it. He hadn't expected the snow. It had started as a light flurry around noon, but by the time the sun began to sink behind the ridge, it was coming down in heavy sheets, blanketing the forest and obscuring the narrow road. The pine trees pressed in from both sides, their branches heavy with fresh powder, bending low like skeletal arms. Blake turned on his high beams. The light bounced off 1,000 swirling flakes, reducing his visibility to almost nothing. He squinted, leaned forward in his seat, and let out a shaky breath. This was a mistake, he muttered. The signal on his phone had vanished almost an hour ago. He hadn't seen another vehicle since he left the main road, and his tires had started to slide on every turn. Somewhere behind him, the trail of his tire tracks was already disappearing under new snow. And then, the engine made a strange coughing sound. Blake's heart skipped. No, no, no. He tapped the dashboard, as if that might convince the car to stay alive. But the engine sputtered, then died completely. The headlights flickered once, then faded into black. Silence. He sat there in the dark, the inside of the car rapidly cooling. The heater's absence was immediate and cruel. Blake wrapped his coat tighter around himself, breathing warm air into his hands. The windows had already begun to fog. "I have to move," he said out loud, more to anchor himself than anything else. He reached for his phone. Still no signal. He was preparing to get out and walk when something caught his eye, a flicker of light through the trees. At first he thought it was a reflection. But then it flickered again. Warm. Orange. Firelight? He pressed his face to the frosted window, squinting through the woods. There it was, a house. Or maybe a cabin. Tucked away behind the trees, its windows glowing faintly, smoke curling from a chimney. Relief surged in his chest. Shelter. Warmth. Maybe even a landline. He grabbed his backpack, shoved his gloves on, and stepped into the storm. The snow swallowed every sound as Blake trudged through the forest. Each step sank knee-deep, his jeans quickly soaked. He kept his eyes locked on the flicker of light ahead, afraid that if he looked away, it might vanish. The wind screamed through the trees, rattling the bare limbs like bones. He stumbled once, catching himself on a snow-covered branch. His breath steamed in the frigid air. The house came into view slowly. It was older than he expected, 2 stories, steep roof, the wood siding bleached gray and flaking. Icicles hung thick from the gutters. The snow had piled up around the porch, but the stairs had been cleared recently. That meant someone was here. Smoke drifted from the chimney, curling lazily into the darkening sky. As he reached the door, he hesitated. Something about the place unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. The windows glowed warmly, and yet the house felt still. As if it were holding its breath. He lifted his hand to knock. Before his knuckles touched wood, the door creaked open on its own. Blake froze. A woman stood in the doorway. She was older, maybe in her late 70s, with a wiry frame, draped in a thick shawl. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and deeply wrinkled, like parchment left too long in the sun. But her eyes, clouded with age, yet unervingly focused, pinned him in place. "You'll freeze to death out there," she said, her voice dry and cracked. I'm sorry," Blake stammered. "My car broke down. I saw your lights. I didn't mean to intrude. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Before it gets worse. Inside, the warmth hit him like a wave. The scent of old wood, tea, and something faintly metallic filled the air. The floors creaked beneath his boots as he stepped in. The woman closed the door behind him without another word. Blake looked around. The room was cluttered, but lived in. Books stacked in lopsided piles. Faded wallpaper curling at the edges. And clocks, dozens of them, lined the walls. Grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, cuckoo clocks, even old alarm clocks. Every single one was stopped. Silent. The woman noticed his stare. They used to tick, she said, almost to herself. Then louder, take off your coat. You're soaked. Blake hesitated, then peeled off his wet layers, grateful for the warmth. He hung his coat by the door and stepped into the living room. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows on the mismatched furniture. Thank you, he said, settling onto the edge of a worn armchair. I really appreciate this. I just need to call someone, maybe get a tow truck or... No phone here, she said flatly, disappearing into a back hallway. Her voice drifted back, no service either. Not for miles. Blake's stomach sank. Do you know how far the nearest gas station is? But she didn't answer. Instead, she returned a few minutes later with a steaming mug of tea. Her bony fingers trembled slightly as she handed it to him. Drink. It'll help you sleep. Blake forced a smile. Thanks. Do you mind if I crash on the couch for a few hours? She nodded. Of course. You can leave in the morning, if the snow lets up. She turned away. At the doorway to the hall, she paused. I didn't always live alone, she said softly. Not until he came back. Blake looked up. Who? She didn't turn around. The Watcher, she said. He moves through the walls. And with that, she vanished into the dark. Blake sat motionless for several minutes after the woman disappeared. The fire popped softly in the hearth. Somewhere in the house, an old floorboard creaked as if someone had just stepped on it, or through it. He sipped the tea. It was bitter, earthy, almost metallic, and left a strange taste on his tongue. He set the cup down on a nearby table, careful not to knock over the stack of yellowed newspapers beside it. They were all years out of date, 1993, 1981, even one from 1964. The clocks on the walls stared at him in silence. None of their hands moved. The silence settled in around him like a fog. Blake stood, stretching, and took a cautious walk through the living room. A large grandfather clock loomed near the fireplace, its hands frozen at 3:11. Behind it, the wallpaper was torn. He leaned in, curious, and noticed long, deep gouges in the wall beneath. Not like accidental scrapes. More like claw marks. He swallowed. It's just an old house, he told himself. Old houses make noise. Old people say weird things. That doesn't mean anything's wrong. Still, something felt off. Blake made his way back to the couch and lay down. The cushions were lumpy and smelled faintly of mothballs and dust, but he was exhausted. He kicked off his boots, wrapped himself in a scratchy quilt from the armrest, and tried to sleep. That's when he heard it. A faint, irregular scratching. He sat up, eyes scanning the room. The sound came again, from within the wall behind the couch. Like fingernails or maybe something harder, dragging slowly through the plaster. He pressed his ear to the wall. Silence. And then, faintly, so faintly he almost missed it, a voice. Here. Blake reeled back. What the hell? He turned on a nearby lamp. The sound stopped instantly. He paced the living room, trying to calm down. Maybe he was overtired. Maybe the tea had something in it. The idea that the old woman had drugged him wasn't comforting, but it made more sense than voices in the walls. Still, he double-checked the windows and front door. Both were shut tight. No way for wind to slip in. He turned back toward the hall, where the woman had gone. He called out, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ma'am? Did you hear that?" No response. He took a few tentative steps toward the hallway. It was dark beyond the first few feet, pitch black further down. None of the lights worked when he flipped the switches. The hallway stretched much farther than he expected, too far for a house this size. "Hello?" A whisper slithered from the darkness ahead. "You're not supposed to be here." Blake turned and ran back to the living room, his heart pounding, slamming his shin into the edge of the coffee table. He cursed under his breath and grabbed the fire poker from the hearth. His hands trembled as he held it up like a weapon. Nothing moved. The fire crackled. The wall behind him ticked once. Just once. But none of the clocks had moved. Blake sat huddled on the couch, fire poker gripped tightly in both hands. The house had fallen completely silent again, but the echo of that whisper clung to the air like smoke. "You're not supposed to be here." His mind scrambled for an explanation. A trick of the wind. A dream. Maybe he'd fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing, but the pain in his shin from the coffee table said otherwise. He glanced at the grandfather clock. Still frozen at 3:11. Still utterly silent. Suddenly, from somewhere deep within the house, came the sound of footsteps. Deliberate. Heavy. Just one set. Moving slowly across the upstairs floor. Blake stood rigid, breath caught in his throat. Another step. Then another. He crept toward the base of the stairs. They curled sharply upward, vanishing into shadow at the second-floor landing. He strained his ears. The footsteps stopped. "Ma'am?" he called again, louder this time. "Hello? Are you up there?" No reply. Just silence. He climbed the first step. Then the next. Each one groaned under his weight. Halfway up, something made him pause, a smell. It was faint, but unmistakable, rot. Like damp earth and decaying wood. Like something left too long in the crawlspace. It made his stomach turn. He reached the top step and looked around. The hallway above was narrow and dim. The wallpaper here had mostly peeled off, revealing splintered wood beneath. Doors lined both sides, but most were slightly ajar, just wide enough to glimpse darkness inside. "Hello?" he said again, quieter now. "Ma'am?" A door at the far end creaked as it slowly opened wider. He approached, the poker raised in front of him. With his other hand, he pushed the door the rest of the way open. Inside was a small bedroom. A rocking chair in the corner, unmoving. A bed with a threadbare quilt. A wardrobe standing against the far wall. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, except for the footprints. Bare footprints. Leading from the bed to the center of the room. They weren't the old woman's. They were too large. Too wide. Blake turned to leave, and the door slammed shut behind him. He yanked at it. Locked. No knob. From behind him, a whisper. 3:11. Blake spun around. The wardrobe creaked open. A camera flash, bright red, filled the room, though he didn't see a camera. His ears rang. His eyes burned. And for a split second, he saw a figure standing in the corner. Tall. Motionless. With eyes like empty wells. Then everything went black. The air was cold. The fire poker had rolled away and lay in a corner. His head throbbed, vision fuzzy around the edges. He staggered to his feet, heart racing. The bedroom was empty, no sign of the tall figure. No footprints. No wardrobe. Wait. He turned slowly in place. The walls had changed. What had once been a simple bedroom now looked more like an attic. Bare wooden beams arched above him. There was no door. Just a single narrow staircase behind him, leading down into pitch black. "Hello?" he called, hoarse. No answer. His feet crunched on something. He looked down. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Scattered across the floor, all curling with age. He picked one up. A young man asleep in bed. The angle was strange, taken from the ceiling, looking straight down. He picked up another. A teenage girl in a sleeping bag. Then,